Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Layoff Legends podcast, where we listen to layoff stories and relevant expertise with the focus on finding inspiration, encouragement, and guidance for the laid off professional community. What if losing your job was not an end, but the launch pad to one of your greatest career pivots? Imagine someone who's been laid off 4 times and all the learnings that come with that. Each blow tougher than the last, and yet turned his every setback into a stepping stone. In today's episode, author and marketing consultant Steve Jaffe walks us through his exact playbook he used to process his layoffs using the 5 stages of grief framework that I found inspirational in the times that we are in today. Steve, welcome to the Layoff Legends podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm really happy to be here. And thank you for the community that you're building and you've built. It's really wonderful.
Thank you, Steve. And I love the opening quote that you chose from Brene Brown. It says, "One day you will tell your story of how you overcame what you went through, and it will become someone else's survival guide." Incredible quote, and I believe that is so relevant to where we are today. So let's jump in. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how your journey unfolded to the point where you wrote this incredible book that is so timely?
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I've had a fairly successful career in marketing and advertising in spite of being laid off 4 times, which I think is the key to the narrative, is seeing the positive and seeing the career arc in spite of those setbacks. I had the pleasure, the privilege to work on the Las Vegas, What Happens in Vegas Stays in Vegas ad campaign, among other highlights. But beneath this book and the purpose of this book lies that journey that I was on from my very first layoff in 2001 in San Francisco to my last layoff in the summer of 2023. And what I found was that the first time I was laid off caught me completely off guard, and I didn't really have any skills, coping mechanisms. I had no idea how to approach it, and I carried that grief with me for about a year and a half until I landed another job. And what I wanted to do was create that roadmap that I used after my last layoff, where I was able to move through the stages of grief in a very, very short period of time. And it was then that I realized, wow, I've come a long way from that first layoff, and I've learned these coping skills. I've learned what I didn't have back in 2001, and I wanted to create something that I could use to communicate to people. I felt like there was a real need. People talk about layoffs, but they don't necessarily talk about the stages of grief. A lot of times they'll go right into like updating your resume or your LinkedIn profile, and this is something that I felt like hadn't seen a lot of light of day. I saw an opportunity and I wanted to share my story and hopefully help some people along the way.
It's such a timely thing. We're seeing more and more of this, especially as the economy contracts and goes up and down, but then also as companies resort to this action more often with the advances in technology. In your book, you talk about the McKinsey research. In 2022 alone, almost 20 million Americans were laid off. 40% of all Americans have experienced one layoff. Looking back, in 2025 alone, 72,000 folks laid off. And so this is something that's becoming more common. You write so vividly about your experiences. Why do you think it's so important for us to tell our layoff stories?
I'm a big believer in removing the shame and embarrassment from a layoff. By saying 40% of all Americans have been laid off at least once, that's an eye-opening number. People hold their layoff story very close and sometimes very quietly because they're afraid that somehow being laid off is a statement about who they are. People derive their self-worth from their job, and therefore when you get laid off, it's natural to feel like there's a direct correlation, but there really isn't. Layoffs are simply the result of a company focusing more on their bottom line than on their employees. It's a lot easier to drive revenue to your bottom line by reducing headcount than it is to increase sales. So this idea that somehow I've done something wrong and like I'm at fault for a layoff, I want to destigmatize that. I want to break that wall down. People, I want to give them permission to talk about their layoff. It's through that you find healing. It's through that you find community, like what you're building, breaking down those walls and giving people the space to talk about all aspects of it, the financial implications, the physical implications, of which there are many after a layoff, emotional, mind, body, spirit, all of these things get affected. And if you don't get in touch with these feelings and process them in a positive, healthy way, when you do land that next job, you're going to bring it into that next job, and you may not be positioned for success in the way that you hope. Some of these things carry some PTSD that you really want to be sure you work through. The first step is talking about it, giving it a voice, giving it a name, and finding a community that you can use for support.
And we're going to walk through some of these because the way you've laid these out, not just in your layoff experience, but I saw this in my layoff experience, and I'm seeing this in others as we've brought them onto the podcast in our growing community. Those stages of grief and being able to accept that you're going through them, identifying where you are, and then working through them. And everybody goes through that at their own pace, but even able to process those, you just come out so much healthier and better positioned to take advantage of the opportunities that come your way. Let's talk about the first stage, denial. You described this so vividly. You walked to that conference room, and I must admit, even you sharing your story as a newlywed, you had just come back from a honeymoon filled with dreams, you're working on the biggest account of your client. And so all of that really just, your mind just filled with so much potential. And then this happened. Bring our listeners into that experience.
It was spring of 2001, San Francisco. I had just gotten married, very young, very early in my career. I was working at a great agency in San Francisco. I had been working on the largest account that the agency held. And I was generally feeling very positive. I felt like personally, professionally, things were going really well. And I had no idea that what became the dot-com bubble, the implosion of 2001, began with this client. The parent company was Metricom. They underwent one of the biggest bankruptcies at the time, and our client slashed their budgets, and therefore the agency really had no more work, and of course, no ability to pay the staff. So I was in the middle of a meeting at the time, and I was called out of that meeting and called into the conference room. Had no idea why. I was told in short order, "Thank you, but the client has slashed their budget, and we appreciate your work, but collect your things, and today's your last day." And it was up until that point that I felt like I had done everything right. I had worked hard. I had worked long hours. The client loved me. The work was successful. There was no reason for the layoff other than forces outside of my control. And of course, it felt very unfair. It felt there was a lot of processing. Well, what could have I done differently? What did I do wrong? Which are just dead end paths. There's nothing there that you can find. A few weeks later, my wife was also laid off. So now here we are, a few months out from our wedding, both laid off, with the economy in San Francisco just tanking from that dot-com implosion. We decided to move to Los Angeles. A few months later then is September 11th. Now the entire economy is in tatters. Not a great time to be out of work. Not a great time to be looking for a job. And that for me was a soul-searching 18 months to find my next job, which then became one of the highlights of my career. That what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. The idea of being expendable and the stages of grief caught me so off guard. I didn't have any coping skills. I had no coping mechanisms. I had no baseline for this type of a setback. I found it really, really difficult. Sort of the first third of my career in advertising agencies, which have always been really prone to layoffs. Eventually, I would pivot into marketing and a little bit of sales, and now publishing. But those in marketing, advertising, and media, technology, finance, they tend to be on the short list when it comes to layoffs. And, that's the private sector. The public sector, in terms of government jobs, was always insulated. Now that's no longer the case. So now this proliferation of layoffs surrounds us everywhere.
There was something you mentioned that really struck me. You said, I did everything right. And in your book, you talk about the myth of meritocracy and how that doesn't really exist anymore. Could you go a little bit more into that and how those rules don't apply?
Yeah, I think that was one of the biggest realizations was I think we've all had coworkers who some are really smart and really productive. They may get laid off. Sometimes I've seen total rock stars, people who were like employee of the year, who get lauded as this is the ideal employee. They'll get laid off. underperformers, folks who just don't seem to carry their weight. I've seen them keep their jobs. When there's a giant reduction in force, you scratch your head and wonder, how is this decision being made? And we see all sorts of discrimination in the workplace. We see nepotism, we see friends and family getting jobs, keeping jobs. It's always been about who you know, not what you know. And I think in layoffs, that's even more true. I also think in layoffs, when companies are hiring, there's a very strict code that they have to adhere to in terms of anti-discrimination laws. When there are layoffs, there really aren't any discrimination laws because they're, one, not disclosing the composition of the people that are getting laid off. So it becomes a very slippery slope of, you know, your merit, how hard you work, doesn't really have a large bearing in your ability to weather the storm of a layoff. And I think that's what also makes processing this so difficult is you can be a high performer and still get laid off. And you struggle then with that shame and embarrassment. And it's like, I worked the long hours. I kissed my boss's ass. I did everything that was expected of me, and I still ended up in this situation. So to say there's unfairness built into a layoff would be a huge understatement, but it sort of is the currency by which layoffs trade in.
Those reactions lead us to the second stage that you described, the pain component. You said you lived in this for 18 months. You didn't really have the tools to actually manage this. You talked about how the odds of developing a new health condition rise by 83% in the first 15 to 18 months. That's a scary stat. You emphasize being gentle with yourself. Were there daily habits or things that you adopted that helped you move through this pain?
Absolutely. Self-compassion, being gentle with yourself is crucial to this journey. I often will tell people going through this, imagine this was a friend of yours. What would you tell that friend of yours? How would you support them and tell them, look, it's going to be okay? Tell that to yourself. Be that friend to yourself. It's all about filling your cup first. It's like when we're on an airplane and they say to put your oxygen mask on first before your kids. Um, if you're helping your kids and you run out of oxygen, well, now you and your kids are going to suffer. You put your mask on first. That way you've got the strength to put their mask on. This is the same type of example. You've got to fill your cup. You've got to put yourself in a position where you're giving yourself the resources to be successful. And for me, a lot of the book is about a mind, body, spirit approach. So what I mean by that is I try and move my body in some way, at least every day, a couple of times, a few days a week, I'll go to the gym. I'll do yoga, surf. All of these things are increasing your body's natural serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. Tough word. They're the natural. Yeah, right. It's your body's natural mood lifters. So those natural brain chemicals will help you fight depression. And so for me, surfing became not just a hobby, but it was like mental health therapy because I'm hijacking all of these positive brain chemicals. I also then mentally, I work on reframing the story. So I work on positioning this not as the end of the road, but as a detour. So I view the setback in the form of a layoff as an opportunity for growth. That allows me to stay in the driver's seat of my own narrative. Staying in the driver's seat keeps me from being a victim. It keeps me from being at the whim of all of the things that we're faced with now as job seekers. I can't control how many people are applying for a job. I can't control if my resume gets seen or not. I can't control how the interview questions go. But if I can stay in the driver's seat and control what I can control, that's going to help me stay on my side of the road in terms of where my focus should be. I can control what I can control. And then I work on a gratitude practice. So your mind naturally wants to fixate on this loss. If through a gratitude practice, you train it to notice abundance. So a simple list of maybe 3 to 5 things that you're thankful for can start to shift your focus away from what did I lose to what do I still have. And you can start to have a long list of things that maybe you weren't necessarily aware of, that you maybe hadn't realized the benefit of. And you could start to diminish maybe the things that you've lost. They're important things. Losing a paycheck is really important. But all of the other things on the other side of the column can start to give you the mindset to deal with those things that you did lose in a healthy way. So those are just a couple of examples of a mind, body, spirit approach, a whole body way of managing the grief that helps you move through it in a way that positions you for success in your next move.
One of the things I really like about some of the practices you suggested is that they're reachable. They're accessible. This isn't something you have to go buy this $1,000 gadget to go figure out. These are the daily things that you can do to incorporate into your lifestyle to actually make this more manageable. Another one I found really valuable was the power of retaking control and ensuring that you hold on to that narrative, because when you're laid off, there's so many things that come in. I'm not good enough. Why did this happen to me? But those are irrelevant questions. And at some point, it's more important to understand where you are, where you want to go, be very confident in your skill set, and be able to craft that narrative that takes you to the next chapter. There was something, even before we move on to the stage, you talked about exiting with goodwill.
Yeah.
And how important it is, no matter how many feelings you have towards the team, towards the employer. Could you talk about the importance of leaving with goodwill wherever you are in your layoff?
I think a couple of reasons. It's important as we walk through life, what we put out there, we get back. If you put out positive energy, you're going to get positive energy back. A lot of times, your manager may not have even been responsible for your name being on that list. A lot of times, they may get a directive that just says, slash 20% of the headcount, and maybe your salary is the highest on that list. There's so many factors that come into play. It's important to treat those around you with kindness and respect. So you don't know what that other person is going through, and you don't know, that experience of doing those layoffs may also be really difficult for them too. So I think it's just important to handle yourself with dignity and respect. And in return, you may earn a little bit of respect. Now, that being said, what I said earlier about business is about who you know and not what you know. By leaving on good terms, you're able to get a positive reference. You're able to maybe get a reference letter, a positive recommendation on LinkedIn. You're able to capitalize on that person's network, where if you leave on good terms and it's not a performance-based issue, they may open up their network to you and say, listen, this really sucks. I'm sorry that we're doing this, but I know this guy over here or this woman over here. They have an opening. I'd love to put your name in. I'd love to recommend you, all of those things. So I write about in the book, 25% of my jobs have come from jobs that were never open on a job board. Job descriptions weren't even written. They came from referrals and contacts and things, kind of like hidden job market that people never see, that you only gain access to through this kind of network of people of who you know. So to tap into that, you need to leave on positive terms. It's a little pragmatic, but it also is just good ways of moving through the world in a positive way.
I find that relevant now because in today's environment, there's so much supply and there's so many people, and it's so difficult to break through some of the AI filtering systems. You always fall back to your relationships that you had and kind of like the reputation that you built. I also encourage people, be aware as you emotionally process this, what you post online as well is really important. It's also about a reflection on not just who you were, but who you are, your character as you embrace this setback. So being mindful of sometimes your online behavior is really, really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Really important. Really important.
So let's go into the more difficult components of this experience. And this is a tough part because we all go through this differently. You talked about how a study showed that 21% of unemployed Americans suffer clinical depression, and that jumps to 28, almost 30% after 27 weeks out of work. There is a lot of impact on families, on relationships, because there's a dynamic there that's affected. Could you talk a little bit about the depression cycle? And one of the things I really appreciated about your book was how candid you were in some of the experiences that you had. How did you identify those signs of depression in yourself, and what pulled you out of those moments?
I think that first layoff for me was the trigger of maybe what had been an underlying kind of like sleeping giant of depression. And that layoff really kind of like let the animal out of the cage. And it was really because, I was tying my self-esteem to my job, which there's that recent study about 83% of Americans view their career as vital to their self-esteem. And I was one of those 83%. So now if you take away your career and your job, what are you left with? I had to fill that cup. But what I learned over time was self-esteem, like a lot of things, one that grows is the one that you feed. So if I feed my positive self-esteem, supportive thoughts and experiences, that self-esteem grows stronger and it fosters greater confidence and resilience. And that self-reinforcing cycle then builds belief in my abilities and encourages me to embrace new challenges and pursue new opportunities. Now, my negative self-esteem, it thrives on criticism and self-doubt and harsh judgments. So when I dwell on those shortcomings, all of those negative thoughts create a self-fulfilling prophecy that leads me to withdrawal, missed opportunities, and diminished self-worth. So it's really important for me that like I need to starve my depression, and it requires an active, conscious daily effort. It involves choosing to mute that negative feedback loop and replace it with positive self-talk. So some of those things that I mentioned earlier, moving my body, gratitude, those things help me position myself in a way where I can put a positive feedback loop in my head and get out of my own head and start to think about what can I do here to take over the narrative and to not let this setback become something that defines me. So it was definitely a journey and not something that I would say I'm still 100% great at. It's a daily struggle. I know that my inner voice and my inner critic is harder than anybody else out there, right? Also, changing that inner voice to be supportive and to be kind and to be gentle and to serve as what I said about what would you say to a friend going through this right now? You'd be really kind and supporting and gentle. Well, use that voice in your own head. So a lot of this is what happens between here, but what happens between here can manifest in really, really difficult ways throughout the rest of your body. You can easily spiral into unhealthy eating practices after a layoff, maybe some sort of substance abuse. Relationships definitely suffer. There's all sorts of stats around somebody loses their job, divorce rates go up, breakups with significant others. So you have to take care of yourself. It begins up here, but it manifests throughout your body and throughout your life.
I love the power of small steps in this process because no matter how small, keeping a routine, drinking enough water, working out, moving your body, those little things have incredible impact, especially given the weight of this experience. This was my absolute favorite quote. Each small accomplishment and item crossed off your to-do list brings you one step closer to where you want to be. There's something very powerful around that, and recognizing what that one small step is for you, that's very, very powerful.
There's a phrase, progress, not perfection. Striving for perfection is a losing battle. You're never going to win that battle. But you can strive for progress. And every day, a few things that you're able to do that you could say, I accomplished this. What went great today? What can I feel proud of? That's progress. And eventually that progress will get you where you want to be.
This was actually my favorite part of the book, the acceptance stage. There were two principles that you introduced there, the rock and the stream. Absolutely love that from Buddhist philosophy. And hopefully I pronounced this right, kintsugi, which is this practice of mending with gold. Do you mind talking a little about those two principles and how our audience can apply those?
So there's a classic Buddhism story that transcends Buddhism into life about using a river as a metaphor. So in a river, there's a rock, and over time, the strength of the river and the current of the river wear down that rock in a way that makes that rock smaller and smaller. The goal is to be like the river that moves around the rock. The rock may appear strong, but it's a barrier in the path of this fast-moving river. And if you have this closed-minded approach and closed-minded way of thinking, about what you're going through. You're like that rock. You're not being flexible. You're not being open to change. You're not letting those currents of life wash over you. And ultimately, life or the current is going to win. If you are flexible and you allow yourself to accept and roll with the punches of life, you can move through it in a way where you don't have that resistance. And so it's about resistance. It's about change, how you navigate change and how you accept change in your life. Change is inevitable. These days, I would argue it's probably inevitable that people are going to get laid off from a job. There's very few jobs that are totally insulated that you could say, oh, I'll never get laid off from this job now. Even obviously, like government jobs. Used to be, you never got laid off from a government job. Forget it now. All bets are off. So accepting that life is going to throw you some curves, accepting life on its terms is a great way to kind of move through life and flow through life. Kintsugi is something I love. I love the concept as well. And in a way, to me, what it means is be proud of the challenges that you've navigated. Be proud of how you've come out the other side. I write in the book, the person that you were before your layoff will not be the same person that emerges from the layoff. It's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a crucible that will change you, hopefully for the better, but maybe not. Hopefully through this book, people will find a way to emerge from it better. The concept of kintsugi is in Japan, if a piece of pottery breaks, they don't throw the pottery away and say, that's it, it's no longer good or beautiful. It's broken, but they can mend it and they can fix it. And what they choose to do is they mend it and fix it using gold. So they draw attention now to where that broken piece was, because that broken piece was merely that. It was broken, but um, it's not worthless. We all have value. We all come through a layoff, maybe a little bit broken. At the end of the journey, though, you can mend this broken part of your career with gold so that it comes out maybe more beautiful, maybe stronger, maybe in a way that draws attention to it. So, like we were talking about the shame and embarrassment and not talking about it and holding it really close. Well, the idea of kintsugi is if you mend that broken piece with gold, you would want to talk about it because it would be a source of strength. It would be a crucible that you made it through that now has increased your level of resilience, your ability to manage life and life's challenges. And it becomes maybe a source of pride. But it's a great way of thinking about, just because we've been through hard times, it doesn't mean that it's all worthless and we're just going to discard the whole thing. So after you become familiar with this idea, if you're ever in like a Japanese restaurant or a Japanese place, you'll see these displayed. And all of a sudden now you'll put together, wait, yeah, I remember there was this piece of pottery. It had this gold thing on it. Now I know what they're doing, right? It's a great life view.
It's so healthy because in celebrating the brokenness, you actually find you create even more value. The Leonard Cohen song talks about how it's the cracks that let the light come in.
Yep.
As we move on to the last stages, reconstruction and renewal, you talk about this concept of negative capability. And this was one I actually struggle with a little bit in the book, and how you describe reconstruction as growth through ambiguity. Could you talk a little bit about that and some of the practical steps that laid off professionals can take to lean into the uncertainty and lean into the ambiguity and find the opportunities there?
But the negative capability is it's the ability to remain in uncertainties and doubts without striving for clear answers or logical explanations. So this layoff is super ambiguous. It's beyond your control. You're not going to get a lot of answers. You go back to the employer and you say, can you tell me why I was laid off? You're not going to get any answers there. So you're in this, let's see, middle between this last job and this next job. And while you're looking for your next job, there's a ton of ambiguity. Right? You're going to be one person out of 100, maybe 500 now applying for a job, probably going to get ghosted a few times. You probably will have a really successful interview that then you get ghosted on and you never hear back. That's a lot of ambiguity. Being comfortable in all of those things that you can't control, controlling what you can control is just really important. So it forces you to focus on the present rather than focusing on regrets over the past or anxiety about the future. It focuses on what's here right now, right in front of me. Well, I can apply for 10 jobs today. I can make my resume the best it could possibly be for these 10 jobs. I can network with 10 people today and make those connections really solid, right? I could follow up with people that I've already applied to. It puts you right in the here and now and allows you to focus on progress, not perfection, right? That list of things that I'm checking off that I'm doing today. It forces you to resist the urge to analyze every detail, and it helps to manage your emotions constructively instead of spiraling into unproductive thought patterns. So for me is how I found the ability to, press send on that 100th resume, and feel like this was worthwhile. Like I'm not just banging my head against the wall.
That is something I want to ask about because a lot of our community goes through this struggle. First resume, second, fifth, 10th, 50th, 100th.
Right.
And it gets harder each time. When you talk to folks who are into sales, they tell you that 101 first sales call, it could be somebody's first call that they pick up. And so you have to approach that with just the same energy and just the same faith and just the same sense of purpose. How do you maintain that sense of vibrancy, positivity, even when, man, this perseverance muscle is being really pushed here? How did you make this work for you? And how do you see this work for some of your clients when it comes to really just sticking with it despite the odds?
It's a battle. It's an uphill battle, and it is not easy, and it's getting harder. So I certainly don't have it all figured out. But what helped me is the inner belief in myself, my own self-confidence, my own belief that I know I'm right for this job. I know that I've worked hard to position my resume in a way that displays that and communicates that. And I know if I'm given a chance to interview, I can communicate to them why I think I'm the right fit. Now, that self-confidence will get challenged 10 times a day, hundreds of resumes. But like you said, every resume, you're basically starting from zero. So even though you sent 100, you really just sent one to 100 companies. And there's no like law of averages that ladders up that says, now I did find some sort of like success rate where I could say if I sent 100 resumes, 20% I would get an interview. And of the 20%, I had maybe a 10% close rate or whatever. You can start to put some numbers behind it. But ultimately, it's about hope. It's about courage. It's about you get knocked down 8 times, you stand up 9. Sending that 100th one resume is the equivalent of standing up on the 9th time. You're not going to let it hold you down. You're going to get up every day and you're going to fight. You're going to fight for yourself. You're going to fight to control your narrative. You're going to fight for what you know is right around the corner. I went from on that journey. I was laid off and I'm home watching the Super Bowl, like by myself on a couch, old gray sweats. The very next year, I went to the Super Bowl in my hometown because of the job that I was able to land. That journey. Everybody's capable of that journey in your own way, however it is. Now, that 18-month journey was really difficult and it tried a lot of my own internal fortitude and everything that I had. But when I came out on the other side and I could gain that perspective, I was able to see that you got to fight. You got to fight for yourself. No, nobody's going to do it for you. And what I would also say is, in terms of like the gratitude practice, celebrate your wins each day. Celebrate sending 10 resumes. Celebrate the fact that you made that resume look as best as you can. Don't make the brass ring, do I get a job today or not? Make the brass ring, did I check off the stuff on my list? And maybe your list was sending 3 resumes. Great, celebrate that. Feel good about that. Derive your win from that thing that you can control and that thing that you can achieve. The rest will come.
I have found that to be a absolute critical survival practice for myself as I've gone through this, which is focusing on the leading versus lagging indicators. And because the leading stuff is what you can control. You put the reps in, you put the work in, and at some point you're able to carry the weight. And I think that if we can focus on that, it's a more healthy way of coping. And then because of this, my pitch is sharper, my interview skills are better. Everything that you've been doing and what you can control ultimately keeps on getting better and better all the way out to the outcome. And this is we're moving into the last stage of renewal here, but your quote around cultivating grit and hope. And, renewal demands the audacity to believe in what comes next. And you talked about self belief, having confidence in yourself. Have there been others that you've seen put these practices in place? So you're like, whoa, this is where this person was, and look at the story that has happened, and they've come out the other side. Do you mind sharing a story or two of folks who've been through this?
There's a story I share in the book about Vera Wang, and I don't know if this is really well publicized. So her story, though, I find a lot of inspiration in. She was somebody who had a real love and desire and passion for ice skating. And I think she may have gone to the Winter Olympics, or she was supposed to go to the Winter Olympics, but either way, it didn't quite pan out. She then pivoted. She got into writing and was a fashion editor at some fashion magazines in New York and did that for a while. It was very successful. And then on the side started a wedding dress business and started designing wedding dresses. And that then became so successful. She built this whole fashion design empire well after her 40s. And it was one pivot after another, not letting each setback hold her back. Um, and that story arc, just to me, there's hundreds of people who have overcome all sorts of challenges in life that are inspirational. The ability to see what's ahead as an opportunity and to grasp that and own it, control that narrative, um, and ultimately build your own path forward. It's about not being a victim and not having a victim mentality. It's about, okay, what's next? How can I channel my passions, my desires, my interests into something that's going to energize me and propel me forward?
I love the practical lessons. Your story is unique as well because you've turned your journey from survivor to storyteller, and you're now doing this and helping others through it. I would use that as an analogy for folks who are dreaming about doing things like writing their own book, starting their own business, designing their own wedding dress company. What's the very first step they should take today?
Listen to your heart and know um, what it's telling you. What do you want to do in this place? What is calling you? And follow that. Listen to that. I found in the summer of 2023, the only thing that I wanted to do was there was about 20% of the company that was laid off. And there were people that I was laid off with that were very early in their career, right where I was in 2001. And I knew that this was going to hit them in the way that it hit me. And I wanted a way to communicate to them what I learned over the years. I wanted to be able to sit them down and say, listen, it's going to be okay. You just need to do these things. That became the inspiration for this book. And that is what I've been focusing on since then. I wanted to help people learn what took me years to learn in a much shorter period of time. But everybody has their own inner passion, their inner dialogue that's directing them and guiding them in a path that they just need to listen to. Some of the things that will help you get there are a daily practice of meditation, of daily practice of gratitude, of getting inside of your head in a productive way and opening up a dialogue, a channel for communicating with yourself, getting some physical positive chemicals that are going to counteract and counterbalance some of that negativity that kind of is naturally in our body. It's so the first step is listening and then hearing what it's telling you and understanding, okay, what are the barriers to that entry? For me, one of the first things I did was I thought, stages of grief, everybody's going to go through them, but are there any books out there like this? If I think I want to write this book, are there like 10 books already out there? Are they all bestsellers? I found there weren't any books. I found there was nobody that wrote about the stages of grief associated with a job loss. So I saw an area in the market that I could, position essentially this. It kind of opened itself up to me. And everybody would probably go through that same path of this is what I think I want to do. Is there a market for this? Is there a need for it? Right. And more in the layoff space, there are resources that have never been available. your podcast, your community you're building. There are other communities on Substack and Discord, on LinkedIn. The proliferation of layoffs now is so wide that there's becoming a support community around them that didn't exist previously. I think that's great. I think it's amazing. None of this stuff existed in 2001. So people now, while there are more layoffs than ever, there's also more resources than ever to help people get through it, to find community, to find support. So that's encouraging. And hopefully, some of those stats that we talked about earlier about health challenges, relationship challenges, the challenges that you face after a layoff, hopefully those numbers will start to go down.
Steve, thank you. This has been an absolute fantastic conversation. As we wrap this here, are there any final thoughts that you would like to share with the laid off community that they should be embracing?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your time. I appreciate all the listeners' time. I'd invite you to check out the book. You could find it on Amazon. Just type in the search bar, The Layoff Journey from Dismissal to Discovery. You can read and learn all about it. You can visit my website. The website is thestevejaffe.com. And yeah, awesome. Thank you. And you can download a free chapter 1, and you can kind of learn a little bit more about that first layoff that I talked about in chapter 1. So you can check that out as well. I'm also on LinkedIn and would love to connect with everybody. If you have a layoff story you want to share, I would love to learn about it. If you want to talk more about the things that I've learned, your experiences, I'm happy to chat and connect with anybody. I'd love to be a resource for folks that are going through this that can help them get to the other side of their journey.
Steve, thanks so much for the time. Everyone, thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us today. If you enjoyed this, please like and rate to help us get more exposure. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave those below. I answer those personally, and I will pull Steve in if necessary. You have links on the screen to our stories playlist. And if you'd like to meet other professionals and discover resources as you navigate your layoff and career journey, consider joining our free private school community. Steve's on there, and he can answer questions as well. The links will be below. Thank you so much again for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.